The Philadelphia Eagles finished last season ranked the #1 passing team in the NFL. And in last Sunday's opener against the St. Louis Cardinals, they faced a team that came out of 1973 ranked dead last on defense.
Well, Pat, I guess that proves you can't believe all or everything you read or hear, huh?
It was supposed to be a cakewalk for the Fire High gang, but the red-clad Cardinals evidently didn't read the write-ups as thoroughly as the visitors. By game's end, last year's #1 passing team wound up with 3 faltering points on the board. It was not a showcase day for either club, but Cardinal quarterback Jim Hart did manage to put together one game-deciding drive, and he started it with a beauty to number 85, Mel Gray. Giving the drive momentum was a familiar name in an unfamiliar uniform, number 20, Ken Willard, formerly of the 49ers. Hart gave his 80-yard creation a final stroke of mastery with a flip to a 9-year veteran, Donnie Anderson, number 44. And although the Cardinals' offensive production was low last Sunday, they do have some impressive firepower. Number 21, Terry Metcalf, is about as explosive as a fella can get. In the fourth quarter, the Cards put together a drive that brought both good news and bad news. The good news was a pass completion to wide receiver number 82, Earl Thomas, who took it all the way to the Eagles' 7-yard line. The bad news was that they fumbled the ball away on the very next play. Suddenly, the Cardinals' bench was fidgeting with remembrances of the Eagles' last play victory in 1973. Then, with less than 2 minutes remaining, Roman Gabriel orchestrated a 71-yard drive that carried the Eagles to the Cards' 9-yard line, where they had 27 seconds to salvage victory. But this year's victory went to last year's losers, as 4 times Roman Gabriel dropped back to challenge the bad-rep Big Red secondary. But 4 times the Cardinals rose above the Eagle effort. In the end, St. Louis had earned themselves a get-even victory that spoke far above the pundits' forecasts of what should have been.
Well, Pat, here we are coming up to the 3rd week of the season, and who would ever have thought that the St. Louis Cardinals would be the only unbeaten team in the NFC East?
I would have never thought so, Tom, but strangely enough, they've been doing it on defense. They were supposed to be an offensive team, but so far, defense has done the work.
Last year, when the St. Louis Cardinals hired Don Coryell, he promised a wide-open offense, and he delivered. This year, Coryell's talking defense, and if you ask the Washington Redskins, they'll tell you what the man says is what the man gets. In their matchup last Sunday, the Cardinals showed to be a two-fisted crew, and a lot of their wallop came from 6'5" defensive end Ron Jankowski, number 78. In the first quarter, the defense, aided by blitzing, number 59 Pete Barnes, came up with the play of the day. Number 78, Ron Jankowski, fielded the ball, and with number 74, Council Rudolph in escort, sprinted 71 yards to a lineman's dream, and a 7-3 Cardinal advantage. And while the defensive score was an outgrowth of opportunity meeting preparation, Charlie Taylor's drop of this Billy Kilmer aerial had something more to do with divine intervention, as the Cardinals clung to their 3-point lead. Three plays later, however, Jim Hart pitched out to number 21 Terry Metcalf, who upstaged Ivan Jankowski on this 75-yard romp, which put the Cardinals up 14-3. But on the following series, Billy Kilmer drove his team back into contention, 9 times calling on number 47 Dwayne Thomas, who responded well to his first start since 1971. Then from the 11-yard line, Billy Kilmer executed a reverse rollout that ended with a TD flip to number 88 Alvin Reed, which put the Skins within easy striking distance at 14-10. With the emergence of the Redskin offensive attack, the Burgundy and Gold defense also returned to its battle-wizened ways as it throttled down the Cardinal threat. In the fourth quarter, the Cardinals' 17-10 lead was given the acid test. In the first week, Roman Gabriel got 4 throws from the 10-yard line and failed. Last Sunday, Billy Kilmer got 4 throws himself. But the Cardinals once again turned back the threat as number 45 Jim Tolbert intercepted the final toss to ensure victory number 2 for the surprisingly competitive St. Louis Cardinals.
Well, Pat, if you would have asked me to name the only teams that would be undefeated after 3 weeks of the season, I don't think I would have included the St. Louis Cardinals on that list.
Well, Tom, the Cardinals are indeed 3-0 and alone in first place in the very competitive NFC East.
The St. Louis Cardinals are hot, and last week Redbird backers were hoping that the Cardinals would burn the Browns, and that's just what they did, turning Mike Phipps' pass pocket into a hot spot. Phipps finally did manage to escape the Cardinal rush line, and he hit Jubilee Dunbar to complete a pretty 25-yard pickup. But this was Phipps' longest completion of the game, and the Browns' only touchdown was on a pass not by Mike Phipps, but by running back Greg Pruitt, who hit a wide-open Gloucester Richardson for a 55-yard score. Phipps' only touchdown pass came when he tried to hit Richardson in the flat, and it resulted in a Cardinal touchdown when Norm Thompson returned it 56 yards. The Browns' strength this year was supposed to be defense, but against the Cardinals, even when they got the chance for a big play, it slipped through their hands. And one thing you can't do this season is give the Cardinals a second chance, because they will make it good. Consider the case of Donnie Anderson. He popped through the line and appeared TD bound, but was just stopped on a shoestring tackle. No matter, later in the game, Anderson got one anyway on a 1-yard plunge and reach. Then there was the Mel Gray case. With 21 seconds left in the first half, Jim Hart hit Gray for an apparent 40-yard score. But on the play, the Cardinals were detected holding, nullifying Gray's touchdown. No matter, in the second half, Gray flew for 68 yards, and he got his touchdown back. Case number 3 was Terry Metcalf, who very nearly broke a punt return for a touchdown, but was stopped by the last man who had a shot at him. But Metcalf wanted his touchdown too, and he took the second half opening kickoff and returned it 94 spectacular yards for his touchdown. And watch this run. It all added up to a convincing 29-7 rout of the Cleveland Browns. Second-year head coach Don Coryell has his Cardinals 3-0 with a promising season ahead. While for the 1-2 Browns, it looks like it may be a long year.
Well, Pat, I've started finally to take the St. Louis Cardinals seriously, and last Sunday they left San Francisco with a 34-9 victory. They've only had 29 points scored against them so far this season, and that's the lowest total in the NFL.
I've been impressed also with their offensive explosiveness, Tom. Of the last 10 touchdowns they've scored, 7 have come from outside the 50-yard line.
At the start of last Sunday's game, the San Francisco 49ers seemed confident they could and would prove the St. Louis Cardinals more fluke than truth. And sure enough, in the first quarter, Cardinal hopes of victory were being extinguished by angry waves of 49ers. All it took was a flip of number 19, Joe Reed's wrist, and Gene Washington had the 49ers 6 points up on the visitors. The Cardinals on the next series, however, recouped and were looking at a three-pointer by number 25, Jim Bakken. But number 57, Frank Nunley, turned the whole thing around when he blocked the kick, and suddenly the 49ers were in goal position from the St. Louis 44-yard line. From there, number 40, Wilbur Jackson, workhorse the San Franciscans to the St. Louis 7-yard line, and a 9-0 lead over the unimpressive St. Louis Cardinals. The final Cardinal indignity was suffered as number 17, Jim Hart, started a come-from-behind program that was quickly preempted by number 37, cornerback Jimmy Johnson. But Johnson's interception was a blessing in disguise, because when the offense caught up with him, the sidelines looked remarkably like a scene right out of Gunsmoke. And on the next series, the Cardinals' defense took the offense's example and came on like a wrecking crew. From then on, the Cardinals were in control, and 4 times 49ers signal callers felt the sting of the league's leading defense. Just before the half ended, number 21, Terry Metcalf, started spurting out of the Cardinal backfield for impressive yardage. From the 24-yard line, Metcalf followed some playbook blocking for a score and spike that no referee could possibly find fault with. Still behind 9-7, Jim Hart came out at the start of the third quarter with both barrels smoking. First, he hit number 85, Mel Gray, who always seems able to make the short one count. His 57-yard catch and carry put the Cardinals in the lead 14-9. With the defense holding strong, the 49ers were forced to punt, and Terry Metcalf was once again center stage. Metcalf's 43-yard punt return put the Cardinals in easy scoring range, and it was number 44, Donnie Anderson, that took Hart's pass for the score and a wrench knee. Jim Hart finished up the 24-point third period with his 59-yard bomb to Mel Gray as the Cardinals buried the 49ers 34-9 to stand all alone on the NFC Eastern Summit, and actually looking forward to playing Dallas this Sunday.
Before last week's game, the St. Louis Cardinals were off to their best start in 8 years, while the Dallas Cowboys had lost 3 straight for the first time in 10 years. But the Cowboys had beaten the Cardinals 6 straight times, including twice last season, by the combined score of 75-13.
This year, Don Coryell's Cardinals have been winning with the big play. Last week, the game's first big play went the other way, and it was about as big as the field will allow. An NFL record-tying 98-yard punt return by Dennis Morgan, a rookie burner from Western Illinois. Dennis Morgan's big play gave Dallas the early lead. But with time running out in the first quarter, St. Louis pulled off another of the year's biggest plays. First, Mel Gray, the Cardinals' little big play receiver, limped to the sidelines and was replaced by his backup Gary Hammond, a third-year wide receiver but a former college quarterback at SMU. Then, Jim Hart threw a lateral to Hammond, number 30, who threw downfield to a somewhat open Jackie Smith. "83 yards later, Cliff Harris saved a touchdown, but only temporarily. And then in the Cardinals' next series, Jim Hart hit another big play, this time for 80 yards to, you guessed it, miraculously recovered Mel Gray. On the next series, Roger Staubach tied the game at 14 with a touchdown pass to Gene Fugit, the third-year tight end from Amherst. The fantastic first-half fireworks display was not over yet. With just 18 seconds left in the first half, Jim Hart found old reliable Jackie Smith, the 12-year tight end who's still a Bull with the artist's touch. At the half, it was Dallas 14, surprising St. Louis 21. On the Cardinals' first possession of the third quarter, St. Louis mounted the lead to 28-14. This time the honors went to the Cardinals' other little big man, Terry Metcalf, number 21. Roger Staubach fought back. Behind flawless protection, 8 times he hit league leading receiver Drew Pearson, number 88. For the season, Pearson already has 30 catches for more than 500 yards. Then with less than 4 minutes to play in the game, Staubach finally tied it 28-28. The whole game, Dallas had kicked off short to avoid Terry Metcalf. But this one time, Efren Herrera let it all hang out. Terry Metcalf's return carried 56 yards to the Dallas 34. And then with a minute to go, Jim Bakken decided an otherwise even contest of big plays with the game's only field goal. For Dallas, a 4th consecutive loss, 3 of them on last-ditch field goals. But for Cinderella St. Louis, a spotless 5 straight, wild, wacky, wonderful wins.
The St. Louis Cardinals are the NFL's only undefeated team with 6 straight victories. They remain the leaders of the NFC Eastern Division by 2 games. But last Sunday against the Houston Oilers, they had their hands full, containing Dan Pastorini's surprisingly explosive offense.
The Oilerettes have been about the most exciting aspect of Oiler football in recent years. That is until the St. Louis Cardinals came to the Astrodome last Sunday and put their fireworks offense on review. When number 35, Jim Otis, launched himself into the Oiler end zone, it was 7-0 and early in the first quarter. But a mismatch it wasn't, as Dan Pastorini countered with a lightning bolt to Mike Montgomery. Number 22, Roger Worley, prevented the touchdown, but on the next play he learned he had only postponed the inevitable, as Montgomery scored to make it Oilers 10, Cardinals 7. In the second quarter, the Cardinals came up with a Houston fumble, and Jim Hart capitalized with a strike to number 82, Earl Thomas, that put St. Louis ahead 14-10. On the following series, the Cardinal Team D literally came through again as number 74, Council Rudolph, with the crunch on Dante, and number 75, Bob Rowe, got the offense the ball again. It was Jim Hart's show once more, and after looking everybody over, he threw again to Earl Thomas, and suddenly it was Cards 21, Houston 10. In 92 seconds, St. Louis had scored twice, but the Oilers came back with a field goal after Mike Montgomery dropped a badly needed six-pointer. Toward the end of the third quarter, the Cardinals put together a drive that would play a determining role in the game's outcome. Number 35, Jim Otis, got it started. Jim Hart then spotlighted number 21, Terry Metcalf, whose versatility and running genius has played a major role in St. Louis' rise to sudden glory this season. When the quarter changed, Hart pitched out to number 44, Donnie Anderson, who punched it in to give the Cardinals a 31-13 lead. It was not going to be that easy for the visitors, however, because Dan Pastorini and Mike Montgomery were teaming up for large tracts of St. Louis real estate. In 5 plays, the Oilers traversed 65 yards, and it suddenly was getting serious at 31-20. On the following series, the Cardinals' offense was manhandled on 3 downs and forced to turn over the football. Pastorini, throwing on every down, moved his team steadily toward the Cardinal goal. Once again, Mike Montgomery made the important catch, but it was to be his last as he suffered torn ligaments on the play. An interference call brought the ball to the 1, where number 12, George Amundsen, scored his second touchdown of the day to tighten it up to 31-27 with 4.5 minutes to play. A Houston upset was in the making, and its threat was obvious to the St. Louis bench. But all fears were erased when number 21, Terry Metcalf, worked his magic on the Oilers' kickoff. His 61-yard return gave the Cardinals field position and a reprieve for victory number 6. Number 7, Dan Pastorini, did have one final but futile series to rekindle his hopes for victory, but 90 yards, 8 pass defenders, and 31 seconds said no way to the gutsy quarterback, whose 354-yard passing performance almost turned back the amazingly undefeated St. Louis Cardinals.
We're just halfway through the season, and the St. Louis Cardinals are leading the NFC's Eastern Division by 3 full games, Tom.
Incredible team right now, and it's really hard to fathom, but I guess after last Sunday's game with the Washington Redskins, the Cardinals' underdog days are certainly over.
The first pass Sonny Jurgensen threw last Sunday went directly into Cardinal cornerback Roger Worley's hands. 53 yards later, number 22 had made it 6-0 in favor of St. Louis, and once again, the mega play Cardinals were doing their thing. Leading 9-0 at the top of the second quarter, Jim Hart dropped back, and it was bingo once again. This time, it was to number 82, Earl Thomas, whose 52-yarder made it Cards 16, Washington nothing. Then, with only 2 minutes left in the first half and 95 yards downstream, Sonny Jurgensen hung it all out. First to Charlie Taylor for 29 yards and breathing room. 7 consecutive passes later, it was hello, Mr. Taylor again on the St. Louis 2-yard line. Sonny completed his coast-to-coast tour with a strike to Larry Brown, which made it Skins 10, Cards 16. In the third quarter, following a Washington field goal, the kickoff ill-fatedly went to Terry Metcalf. With excellent field position, Hart pitched again to Earl Thomas, who can run as well as he can catch. Facing 3rd and 8 at the 26, Hart went to Terry Metcalf, whose one-on-one confrontation with Chris Hamburger was no contest. Metcalf's magical mystery tour had done it again, and his drive-sustaining first down left the Redskins in shock disorder. On the following play, Hart, showing a feel for pressure, moved away from danger long enough to loft the six-pointer to number 44, Donnie Anderson, whose solitary figure in the end zone says a great deal about the dizzying effect of the multi-headed Cardinal attack. But if the Washington defense was bewildered, Sonny Jurgensen was never more right on as he pinpointed the offense downfield. In 14 plays, Jurgensen had the Redskins at the Cardinal goal, where he looked it all over before picking out number 43, Larry Brown, for a controversial touchdown that really tightened things up at 23-20, Cardinals. But with 6 minutes left on the clock, the Cardinals showed a champion's composure as they ran at will through the vulnerable Redskin defense to retain possession to the game's end. When it was over, the Cardinals' victory could be much likened to Jim Otis' clock-consuming run, in that throughout the game and season, every Cardinal player seems motivated to a maximum effort on a consistent basis. And their 23-20 victory over Washington was enough to convince anyone the St. Louis Cardinals are legitimate Super Bowl contenders, or at the very least have to be rated even against the Dallas Cowboys this weekend.
When the Cowboys played the Cardinals 4 weeks ago, St. Louis won the game on a field goal in the waning minutes. Last Sunday, besides wanting a full measure of revenge, Dallas needed a victory over the undefeated Cardinals to keep alive their wild card hopes for the playoffs.
For 7 weeks, Don Coryell and Jim Hart have kept the prow of the Cardinal victory ship straight on course to the Super Bowl. But it would take a mighty leap to scale the mountainous doomsday defense. Once again, St. Louis relied on the big play, and Hart's well-aimed lob to Jackie Smith gave St. Louis an early 7-0 lead. For most of 1974, Roger Staubach has disdained the ad-lib play, but it was his gambling, freewheeling style that led Dallas to a Super Bowl championship 3 years ago. Staubach moved the Cowboys into a 7-7 tie with some pinpoint passing, some clutch receiving, and a roughhouse run by Robert Newhouse. But what worried Dallas and Tom Landry was the Cardinals' ability to swoop down swiftly and score. That concern became a reality when Hart nailed Mel Gray at the flag. Trailing 14-7, the doomsday defense howled in on Hart. In the first wave came Pat Toomey. In the second, number 79, Harvey Martin. Prodded by the rolling thunder of doomsday, Dallas crashed into a 14-all tie on a smash by Calvin Hill. With the battle dead even, Staubach whistled a game winner to nifty Drew Pearson, the NFL's leading receiver. But Pearson's 52-yard explosion was aborted by a holding penalty, and St. Louis victory flag caught full wind. Undaunted, Dallas later drove to the Cardinal 3, and with 7 seconds left, rookie Efren Herrera kicked the Cowboys into victory and handed St. Louis their first loss of the season, 17-14. Week 9 found the Vikings in St. Louis for a Monday night encounter with the league's hottest team, the Cardinals, and Jim Hart, the NFC's hottest passer. St. Louis led at the half 17-14, but 3 turnovers set up the Minnesota ground game, and that was the difference between the 2 highest scoring teams in the conference. The top rushing quarterback in pro football history delivered the clinching touchdown in a 28-24 victory. And after 9 weeks, the Vikings led the Central Division by 3 full games. But as Bud Grant warned, it was still no time to relax.
Put 2 football teams of roughly equivalent talent on a field, and the team which proves superior will usually be the team that suffers the fewest lapses in concentration. Witness the St. Louis Cardinals versus the Philadelphia Eagles last Sunday in Philadelphia.
For the first time in over a decade, the Philadelphia Eagles opened a football season with great expectations and even greater enthusiasm. But now, with their record disintegrated to 4 victories against 5 defeats, all that's left is great enthusiasm. And like the kingdom which was lost for the want of a nail, the Eagles' frustrations have been caused by the simplest thing, lapses in concentration. 5 times the Eagles aided the Cardinal ball control game with needless offsides penalties. And these so-called aggressive mistakes, like all others, are the result of momentary lapses in concentration. So drop passes and passes that shouldn't have been thrown, and all the other momentary lapses left the Eagles looking like a very disconcerted team. Meanwhile, the consistent Cardinals cut up on Eagle pass pockets an incredible 9 times, dropping Roman Gabriel and leaving the Greenbirds one more thing to think about, losing. And losing is a very disconcerting thought. That the game was close is a credit to the Eagles' defense, which limited the Cardinals' mega play offense to 1 mini mega play. This Jim Hart to Earl Thomas connection good for 36 yards. Jim Hart built on the big play by hitting the consistently brilliant Terry Metcalf, who carries inside the 1. And Hart into the game's only touchdown drive himself, sneaking over to snap a 2-game Cardinal skid and maintain a full game advantage at the top of the NFC's Eastern Division. Final score, the consistent Cardinals 13, the less disciplined Eagles 3.
Well, since last season, when the New York Giants moved their home games to the Yale Bowl, they've only 1 victory in 11 games they've played there, and that was over the St. Louis Cardinals last year. This year's Cardinals are a different-looking team than last year's, but the Giants still haven't found a way to win in their New Haven home, away from home.
The first time the Giants had the ball last week, they might have foreseen the kind of day that was in store. Despite his unusual technique, Dave Jennings managed only a 31-yard average on 4 punts. And on top of that, there was still operating room for number 21, Terry Metcalf. The second time New York had the ball, taking advantage of solid protection from his offensive line, Craig Morton tried to surprise the Cardinals with a first down pass. Number 43, Norm Thompson's return had St. Louis in good position again. And Jim Bakken was called in for his second field goal. And a 6-0 lead at the end of the first quarter. After loosening up his arms and fingers, the new Giant hero, former Dallas quarterback Craig Morton, finally completed a successful drive with just 21 seconds left in the first half. Ron Johnson, recently returned from an ankle injury, did the honors for New York. Johnson's touchdown gave New York the lead 7-6 at the half, and as has become the custom with the new Giants, after helping set up a score, the #1 draft choice from Ohio State, guard John Hicks, number 74, congratulated the scorer in the end zone. In the third quarter, Craig Morton built the New York lead to 14-6 with a strong pump fake and then a perfect spiral to tight end Bob Tucker in the end zone. On the next series, Jim Hart scrambled out of trouble long enough to find a new St. Louis favorite, wide receiver Earl Thomas, number 82. Thomas' touchdown brought the Cardinals within 1 at 14-13. And then in the final 5 minutes came the patented St. Louis Cardinal long-range explosion, this time from Jim Hart to Mel Gray. In all, Hart completed 25 passes, 5 of them to Mel Gray. And St. Louis led 20-14, but the Giants were not dead yet. With a minute and a half left, Craig Morton found Walker Gillette alone in the end zone, and the Giants led once more, 21-20. For the 4th week in a row, it looked as though the Giants would win a close one in the final minutes. But for the 3rd week in a row, the magic was only a mirage. This time, with just 3 seconds left, Jim Bakken supplied another thrilling finish for the Cardinals and another disheartening loss for the Giants. St. Louis had 9 wins, the most in the NFL, along with Oakland. But as they say, it was a fight to the finish.
Last week, when the Kansas City Chiefs traveled across state to St. Louis, both teams found themselves in quite an unusual position for this time of year, Tom.
That's for sure, Pat. Unusual is hardly the word, though. The amazing Cardinals have already been guaranteed a playoff spot, while the only title the Chiefs could hope for was the Pro Football Championship of the state of Missouri.
It was a perfect day for a sporting event, an event like snowball throwing, for instance. The Cardinals were very good at throwing snow. Throwing the football was a bit more difficult. Number 21, Mr. Everything for St. Louis, Terry Metcalf, gave the Cardinals an early 6-point lead, which turned out to be the only 6 points of the entire first half. The rest of the time, the idea was ball control. Both teams had serious problems trying to move the ball, but in the 3rd quarter, a pass interception put Lynn Dawson in scoring position for the first time in the game. Number 31, Jeff Kinney, managed to hang on, and the Chiefs led 7-6. No one could approach the goal line again until the 4th quarter, when Willie Lanier had the Chiefs knocking on the door once more. The yards nearest the goal line are the toughest for any runner. Wendell Hayes took his lumps, and the Chiefs led 14-6, a lead which might be called comfortable. But who could be comfortable in last Sunday's weather? Certainly not an unknown rookie like number 30, Cleophas Miller from Arkansas Pine Bluff. Or could he? Cleophas Miller carried 15 times for 95 yards and set up a field goal which made it 17-6. Not until then did St. Louis threaten again. Mel Gray's remarkable reception brought the Cardinals close enough for quarterback Jim Hart to hand a touchdown to the magic man Terry Metcalf. Metcalf's touchdown made the score 17-13, but the Cardinals could not pull off any miracle finishes last Sunday. And Coach Don Coryell would have to wait at least one more week for victory number 10. Meanwhile, the governor of Missouri presented the Governor's Cup to Hank Stram and the Kansas City Chiefs.
St. Louis Cardinals needed only a victory last Sunday, Pat, to claim the crown of the NFC Eastern Division. But in order for the Cardinals to ascend to the throne first, the demise of the New Orleans Saints was certainly necessary.
Beating the Saints on their home turf was not going to be easy, though, Tom, because after 7 years of also-ran football, it finally appears as though New Orleans is on the verge of fielding a contender.
It can easily be said that for most of this season, the bark of the New Orleans Saints has been much worse than their bite. But against Jim Hart and his St. Louis Cardinals, big red gainers like this missile number 82, Earl Thomas, were few, due mainly to an obstinate New Orleans defense and partly to some unaccustomed failures in the basic Cardinal execution. The Cardinal mega play offense, which in early season literally tore the league in two, faltered under the gray skies of New Orleans, and replacing it was a supercharged Saint attack led by an unheralded rookie wearing lucky 13 named Larry Saifa. When Archie Manning and reserve quarterback Bobby Scott turned up lame, Saifa received the starting nod, and beautifully supported by a group of outstanding rookies, the Saints sounded a warning for the future. The Saints' most impressive youngster was Alvin Maxson, number 28, who swirled in, around, and through the Cardinals for 148 yards, a new Saints single-game rushing mark. Maxson featured a catch-me-if-you-can routine that, for at least on this Sunday, was as good as there was in the league. Alvin Maxson's 66-yard run put the Saints up by 7. However, the rookie show had only just begun. For waiting in the wings and set to play, can you top this, was another rookie, this one adorned with the number 27, a person named Rod McNeil. McNeil was the Saints' number 4 draft choice, and another look at the play reveals that the former USC star is apparently healed from earlier injuries which may have slowed his progress toward stardom. The Saints later scored when Larry Saifa surprised the Cardinals, slipping rookie tight end Paul Seal, number 84, around on the reverse. New Orleans won it 14-0 over the playoff-bound Cardinals. And as for next season, perhaps the Saints have taken the initial step towards the day when they might claim their first winning season ever. A year from now, we'll all know for sure.
Well, Pat, the St. Louis Cardinals were trailing the New York Giants at halftime 14-0. When they got the news, the Redskins were clobbering the Bears.
The choice was real simple from that point on, Tom. The next half would decide whether or not they would back into the divisional playoffs as the wild card team or go there as the undisputed champions of the NFC East.
The Cardinals have lost 4 of their last 6 games, and in the first half, the Giants looked as though they were going to make it 5 of 7. Characteristically, the Cardinals weren't getting beaten as much as they were beating themselves, and typically enough, the problem was concentration. Meanwhile, the Giants, led by quarterback Craig Morton, were closing in for first blood with this pass to Ray Rhodes. From the 2, Ron Johnson butted in, and it was Giants 7, Cards nothing. A few drop passes later, and the Giants were in business again, thanks to a field-shortening return by the multi-purpose Mr. Rhodes. Five plays later, it was Giants 14, NFC playoff team 0, and St. Louis's mistakes seemed like they could almost go on forever. At the very threshold of their first divisional title, the St. Louis Cardinals were then faced with whether they had the championship poise to ignore their frustrations and play a winning second half. The answer was not long in coming, however, as with Jim Hart orchestrating, the Cardinals commenced a comeback. Once at the Giant 4-yard line, Mr. Hart decided not to pass to his primary receiver, then checked off to number 20, Ken Willard, whose catch made it Card 6, Giants 14. But the deficit was quickly made up as an interception turned the ball over, and Jim Hart only needed one throw to number 81, Jackie Smith, for the touch. On the following series, the defense came up with interception number 2. And by that time, everyone was turned on, especially number 21, Terry Metcalf. And as the third quarter ended, miraculous Mr. Metcalf was in the end zone, and 20 St. Louis points were suddenly on the scoreboard. At the beginning of the fourth quarter, the St. Louis defense capped a brilliant fourth consecutive series blitz of the Giants when number 67 Larry Stallings came down with a Craig Morton pass, then alertly handed off to number 43 Norm Thompson, who set up the final Cardinal touchdown. When Terry Metcalf strode into the Giant end zone to complete the 26-14 victory, the St. Louis Cardinals had won themselves their first divisional title in 26 years. Up in Minnesota, pro football is more an event than a spectator sport. And if you think the Vikings are tough, you ought to see their fans. When the playoff fever is on them, they come out to the Met and warm up in old-fashioned free-for-alls just for drill. But when they begin to take the wraps off for the big game, Minnesota Viking fans, who are among the hardiest and most loyal in the league, get 100% behind their heroes in purple to root them on over the invaders. This year, the Interlopers were the surprise team in the NFC, the big play, exciting St. Louis Cardinals. But the Cardinals opened action, taking a page from the Vikings book on creative defense, as middle linebacker Mark Arneson, number 57, stole his Fran Tarkenton try for Jim Lash. This halted the Vikes' first sustained drive. St. Louis quarterback Jim Hart then went right at the gut of the Vikings' D, practicing the old philosophy that the way to beat Minnesota is to run straight at them. But Hart could not resist his big play air game for long, and on this play, he hooked up with Terry Metcalf for 29 yards well into Minnesota territory. But there, Minnesota choked off the St. Louis drive using a defense specifically designed for the playoffs. A repeat will show that Minnesota used 5 down linemen: Carl Eller, Doug Sutherland, Alan Page, Jeff Seaman, and Bob Lertzema with 6 defensive backs. And Lertzema, number 75, came open to smother the Cardinals' first offensive threat. But the Cardinal drive did shift the advantage to St. Louis, as twice from midfield, punter Hal Roberts booted the ball dead inside the Minnesota 5. And on this one, the Cards almost got a break. The ball took an odd bounce off Bill Brown's leg, but Brownie recovered and the Vikings hung on until on their first possession of the second quarter, St. Louis took advantage of its good field position. First, Hart hit Earl Thomas, and then Hart himself sustained the threat when he scrambled for a first down at the Viking 14. One play later, Hart found Earl Thomas wide open, and St. Louis took a 7-0 lead. A view from a slightly different angle shows that Hart was unhurried, and he had time to wait for Thomas to diagonal across the field and come clear, accounting for the first score of the game. The Vikings wasted little time in mourning as Fran Tarkenton sent Chuck Foreman hurrying to the Cardinal secondary for a 19-yard gain to get Minnesota going. But the play that kept the drive alive was this pure Tarkenton jump pass to Dave Osborne, bringing the ball to the St. Louis 33. From there, Minnesota played nickel and dime for 3 and 4 yards at a time until Francis sprinted out to his right and found John Gilliam soaring for the catch to complete a 16-yard scoring play, tying the game at 7. But with time dwindling, the half was not yet over as Hart moved his mates upfield. The Cards moved 66 yards in 43 seconds, only to run out of time at the Minnesota 6. From there, Jim Bakken missed a 23-yard field goal attempt, leaving the score not at half 7-7. After the intermission, Jim Hart's hot hand turned cool, and this poorly thrown ball was picked off by Jeff Wright at the top of the third period. Although Wright returned the ball to the St. Louis 44, The Vikings had to settle for a 37-yard field goal from Fred Cox, and they had a 10-7 advantage. But on the Cardinals' next possession, Minnesota had better luck, as Terry Metcalf, trying to sweep right, lost control of the football, and Nate Wright, number 43, turned the error into a 17-7 lead for the Vikings. A closer look will show that Carl Eller broke down the timing of the play and loosened the ball in Metcalf's grasp. Alan Page dislodged it, and the Vikings had 7 game-breaking points from a defense which has contributed so much to the Minnesota Vikings' success under head coach Bud Grant. On their next series, the Minnesota offense took its turn, and 3 times Tarkenton fired long against the Cardinals' fine cornerback Norm Thompson. And on the 3rd try, he connected with John Gilliam. A missed extra point made the score Vikings 23, Cardinals 7 after 7.5 minutes of the 3rd quarter. And as John Gilliam trotted upfield to receive congratulations from Fran Tarkenton, the St. Louis Cardinals had to be rehearsing these bitter lessons for next year, reminding themselves that the playoffs are a 60-minute season, permitting not the slightest lapse in concentration. Sparked by their sudden surge, the Vikes did not allow Jim Hart and the Cardinals even a first down until the final play of the quarter. And then Jim Hart heaved long desperately. The ball fluttered in the leaden Minnesota sky and fell short, or it too would have been in vain. But Mel Gray came back and got it, reviving hopes for the Cards' dormant offense. But a second look reveals under what pressure Jim Hart launched his prayer. But even as he followed the football downfield, Jim Hart, essentially a rhythm passer, must have known that he was playing the Vikings game, that he was being forced to hurry his patterns and his release. And this is not the same successful rhythm which had brought the Cardinals and their big play attacks so far, so fast. Pressure, too, was affecting all the veins and arteries of the Cardinals' offensive system. And what once had been sure and easy was now uncertain and difficult. Meanwhile, Fran Tarkenton had his short stroke offense in perfect tune. And the cooled-off Cardinals' big playmakers had to stand aside and watch as their private hopes and championship dreams all but dissolved. With 12 minutes gone in the last quarter, Chuck Foreman completed a 57-yard drive with this 4-yard burst. Trailing 30-7 with nothing to win but the memory of having tried to the last, Jim Hart mounted his final thrust. Oddly, not until now did Hart turn to his great tight end, Jackie Smith. With only a minute remaining, Terry Metcalf broke into the end zone, and the St. Louis Cardinals had their pride and the Minnesota Vikings had their victory, 30-14. A victory won for 60 full minutes of concentrated effort and attention to detail. A victory for experience over exuberance, and a victory ensuring one last week of rock-tough football both inside and outside the Met.